All right, hello world, we are back. Another episode of the Resistance podcast. I'm Connor.
And I'm Thurston.
And today's podcast is your definitive guide to diets.
Yep.
We're gonna go into keto, paleo, vegan,
Yep,
Bruce Lee, low calorie.
Yeah, we're gonna rate all the diets.
Okay.
And like the big objective for this, and it's, a pretty lofty goal because it's been like my lifelong passion. I've been into nutrition now 30 years, but there's so much sort of misunderstandings and confusion when it comes to diets. Because when anyone wants to, I want to get healthier, or I want to lose weight, I want to improve my blood sugar, whatever it is, and they go to do it, they get bombarded with all these different types of diets saying, this is the answer, this is the answer. And then the whole thing seems confusing. And for me, that's a real pity because we really need to be on the same page and really push health forward because, we're just so unhealthy at this point. So I really would love this, if we can pull this off, for this to genuinely be the definitive guide where if anybody relates back to this, they have a deep understanding and a good framework to look at anything. And then you can really assess any particular diet that you may want to try through this lens. And also for people, if they're at the dinner table, they can out-argue anybody else.
Let's be real, that's the most important thing.
Yeah, because something that I've brought all the research papers today for this, and this particular paper I'm going to go deep into because it's pretty phenomenal, and you'll see why in a minute. So that's why, let's see how far
we're gonna cut through the crap today, folks.
Exactly. Yeah.
No more crap.
Yeah.
Thurston's getting controversial, but at the end of this, no matter what diet you subscribe to, we'll probably make you mad. Maybe not.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because once you start getting, it's like politics or like whatever. People have such strong emotional attachments to all these different approaches, whether it's vegan or carnivore or keto or whatever. So, look, you're not going to please everybody. But, look, I'm only looking to get the facts, the research, get a clear framework, and then you can delve into all of those. And hopefully, even if you stick with whatever it is, that you're able to do it in a better way.
Yeah.
So.
Well, awesome. Buckle up, folks. We're going to dive in.
Great.
Thurston, why are we talking about diets today? Is this just about learning how to, lose fat and weight loss? Is that what diets are for? Is that it?
Well, it's definitely, a lot of people consider dieting as, I got to lose weight, so I got to go on a diet. It's probably the most common reason that people go on diets. But no, we did do a whole podcast on weight loss and that. But this is much bigger picture because really it's because our health has declined so much. Because it is funny, diets are a very recent thing. If you think throughout history, we're never on a diet. We just ate whatever it was for hundreds of thousands of years. And animals don't go on diets like lions and tigers. I think I'm going to go keto this week.
Yeah, they don't really
they'll probably go carnivore.
Yeah, maybe.
But that's, you just don't even think of diets. So it's a very recent thing in human history. But the real reason is because we're so unhealthy. And that's the big thing that I really want to get across. And I do want to bring out the data and the stats and stuff on this,
please.
just to really illustrate that point. Because with any species, like humans in the last 100 to 200 years, our health has literally gone off a cliff. There's never a time in history where any species has been so unhealthy. And really, it's in, if you think of humans, like the latest incarnation, Homo sapiens, we've been on the planet for 200,000 years. And our health has been, there's a couple of little blips along the way, pretty consistent. And then the last 200 years, bump, nosedive. Complete nosedive.
Let me ask you something. Let me play the devil's advocate a little bit because I think this might be going through some people's minds. So 1700s, 1800s, whatever, a couple hundred years ago, you look at life expectancy and it's in the late 30s, early 40s, people were dying a lot younger. And then you look at now and I think life expectancy in America is up to 78 years old. Most people are pushing towards 80. Yeah. Which makes me think that we are a lot healthier. So what's the disconnect there? What's actually going on?
Okay, yeah. Well, before I jump into that, just to kind of get a bit of because I always find we're so much caught in the day to day. And because we're all in the same boat, and quite frankly, it's sinking, we don't even notice. So just to sort of take a little bit of a step back, so, well, how much has our health declined? Has it even declined? And we'll kind of go through that. But I just want to show, and I do want to back this up by actual data, science, and research, because for this to be a reference, I don't want to just, why would they take anybody's word for it? Let's actually go through the data and see. So, I mean, this is just, and we'll show this up on the screen, but this is just like
we'll probably put links to all this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
So, and if you're listening to this one, I'm just showing, this is the share of adults that are obese 1975 to 2016. So this is from the World Health Organization, and it looks at the United States between 1975 to 2016. And you can really see there that, like back in 1975, obesity rates looks like roughly 12%, and now we're up to close to 38%, and that's only up to 2016. The latest,
going straight up.
Exactly. So you can see this line going straight up. So that's only in the last 50 years.
Wow.
And our obesity has literally gone from about 12%, and the latest is close to 45%. It's 43, 44%. So roughly 45%. So that's a massive increase, 4 times in the last 50 years increase in obesity. So that's huge. And then the other aspect, because I'm so into metabolic health, because, okay, people say, well, okay, we put on weight, but does that really affect our health? So this is diabetes. And this is from 1958 to 2015. So again, about 60 years. And this is showing, and this is fascinating because not a lot of people will know this, but so the percentage with diabetes, you're talking about less than 1% in 1958. Wow. And now in this, it just goes up as far as 2015, type 2 diabetes, and it's close to 8%. So that's a huge increase, like 8 times, 800% increase. And in fact, the latest, most recent research on diabetes were closer to 14%.
Wow. And this is almost an entirely avoidable disease.
Well, I would argue that it is, because if you just go back in time 50 years, people say, oh, well, it's genetic, but genetics don't change that quickly. And I will go through this in more detail. So that is huge, because and about 50% of Americans are either diabetic or pre-diabetic. So off the charts. So we really have just plummeted our health. Like, it really is like, if you, and you look at the same with things like hypertension, heart disease, cancer, dementia, all of these, what are called metabolic health disease, has absolutely just skyrocketed. And there's millions and millions of people dying every year needlessly from this. I mean, it really is like startling if you take a step back and look at it and you go, wow. Again, we're so caught up in the day to day. I mean, this should be front page news above everything else. In fact, I would argue this is the single most important thing facing humanity, because I think a lot of the other really important things to look at is almost a knock-on effect. Because, for instance, healthcare in this country is over $3.3 trillion, and it's crippling the economy, and it's the number one reason why people go bankrupt. So it is absolutely having such a knock-on effect on the economy. And even places like China, for instance, they're projecting total, again, economic breakdown just because of the rise of diabetes.
Wow.
So because these metabolic health disease, they're things that you need constant care and medication and support for your whole life. Yeah. So the expense, it's about 80%, according to Dr. Robert Lustig, of our healthcare costs. So because of that impact on the economies, I mean, you could arguably say it's even at the root of knock-on effects like wars and stuff, because a lot of these things are economically motivated. So everything that we're looking at and the whole world that we're living in, we've almost forgotten ourselves, because not just are these diseases, but it's our whole quality of life is diminished, both physically and even our brains. So when you look at rates of depression, when you look at rates of anxiety, and of course dementia and these things, these are all on the rise as well. So our like, it's kind of funny, we're living in this pretty incredible world, but yet we've forgotten ourselves as part of it. So so that's why I think this is important.
I think it's a very important conversation. I think the scary thing too is most people just surrender to it. They think it's inevitable, and that, you know, as you get into your 50s, you know, these things happen, and you know, if you compare me to the other 50-year-olds in the country, I'm right where I should be, and that's normal. But I think we should start, like you said, look backwards and look at like what our potential is, what used to be normal, and stop comparing ourselves to the normal today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do want to debunk all of those things. So that's a good point that you brought up, because it is one of the most common ones. Oh yeah, well, the only reason that, you know, we had these, you know, we're having these diseases because we're living longer, and we all got to 40 and died like that. So definitely want to go into that, and again have some data on that. So there's a number of factors that come into that, because
to lifespan you're talking about now.
So when we look at longevity and how long we've lived for, and people will say, well, we only live to 40 and that's why. Well, the first, I mean, there's a number of reasons, but the first one that I want to bring up is child mortality rates. So this is huge, because even from 1800 to 2020, this is the graph. Again, we'll bring it up on the screen, but you can see there.
Going straight down.
Yeah, you're talking close to 46%, almost 50%, where you had infant mortality. And that was due to you know, a lot of disease back then, which I'll talk about further. So that alone has caused, like, if you think of almost 50% of people dying at birth, so then if you average it out, the life expectancy is 40, but obviously if one child is born and unfortunately, you know, dies at birth, but then the second one will then live to 80, and then the average is 40. If you know what I mean.
That makes sense.
So when you factor that in, we have had small increases in life expectancy, but you're talking about like maybe 5-6 years, not like 40 years. Okay.
Wow.
So that's the first thing to kind of point out with the life expectancy. And even in the last few years, for the first time, life expectancy has actually taken a dip.
After COVID, right?
Well, even before COVID, it was starting to just dip in the last sort of 3 to 4 years, but definitely during that time. But so life expectancy has actually taken a dip. But again, bigger picture, 100, 200 years ago, no, we didn't get to 40 and just die. It was infant mortality was probably the biggest factor when you take that into account. So a health span is obviously we're maybe living longer because we've got, you know, good medical care, so it can keep us alive, but we're still sick. Then we, you know, get, you know, so we can technically live longer, but not healthier. So that would be my first point. So my second point then, when you look at that is, well, and here's an interesting one. So question for people, what is the single biggest breakthrough, medical breakthrough in the last 200 years that has had the greatest impact on humanity?
I have a guess.
Okay.
Anesthesia.
So actually sanitation.
Dang it.
Because a lot of people will say that. They'll say, you know, antibiotics.
Just washing our hands.
You know, vaccines. But it's actually incredible. And that made a huge difference, because again, if you look at the biggest killers 100, 200 years ago was infectious disease. So when you think about that, it was, you know, because we all got into cities and stuff like that, the sanitation, if you imagine there's no sanitation, it's terrible. And the places would stink and stuff like that. So that was a huge innovation and absolutely transformed. So literally the toilet is the number one biggest breakthrough that's probably saved more lives in the history of humanity than anything else. So it's actually sanitation that was the biggest breakthrough. And this was actually a survey done with the British Medical Journal, and they asked all the readers, and you know, lots of them rated, you know, antibiotics and all these other things, penicillin, but actually number one was sanitation. So that's a second point on that. So makes a big difference. And to back up the point even more is when they've researched remote tribes and civilizations that are still on their traditional diets for, you know, thousands of years, when they look at those people, they don't have the same metabolic disease that we do. They don't have the same rates of obesity and diabetes and dementia, heart disease, cancer. So they're way healthier. And they've been intensely studied, especially 100 years ago. There's very few of them alive today that are still on their traditional diets. But when they did look at that, all across the world now, they're way healthier on the traditional diet compared to the modern diet. So that's the third point that I would debunk that idea that we haven't got less healthy. And then the last one is, even if you look at it from the point of view of even childhood obesity, and even what they used to call type 2 diabetes adult onset, but lots of now kids are getting type 2 diabetes, and a lot of them are pre-diabetic.
That's scary.
Yeah, so for instance, 20% of kids are now in the obesity category, up again, way up compared
Just setting
to the
them up
last
for a
30, 40,
lifetime of
50
issues.
years. Yeah, yeah. And unfortunately, and all these numbers and data and stats, which is pretty remarkable, has actually increased a lot more, which we're going to start to see a lot of research and data come out in the next few years post-COVID. Because during COVID, our health has actually gone way worse again, way worse, because we exercise less. Yeah, we exercised a lot less. We had a lot more stress and stuff like that. And then we consumed a lot more processed foods. So hopefully, but you know, definitely play devil's advocate. But like,
no, this is
does
great.
that clear up that point that it's not just because we're, you know, living longer, and we totally understand that before we move on.
Yeah.
I really want everyone to understand this, that's because people will bring up that point. It's probably the most common rebuttal initially.
Okay, so I believe you. We're increasingly getting more unhealthy.
Yeah.
Which kind of brings us into the whole diet thing. You know, what do we do? How do we get healthier if this is such a problem?
Yeah.
But really quick, I want to ask, because I think the word diet scares a lot of people. What do you mean by that? Are these lifestyle things, or are these little hacks that you implement for 2 weeks? Because I think a lot of people are scared of the word diet, because you hear stats like everyone that goes on a diet, as soon as you're done, you know, you gain a bunch of weight back, and you shouldn't go on a diet, and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
What do you mean by it when we're talking about definitive guide to diets?
Yeah, so, I mean,
there's also there's a spectrum there. There's a range.
So technically the word diet just means like kind of like the food that we eat, and that's considered a diet. So, you know, if you live in the Mediterranean, you're on a Mediterranean diet. It's just the food that you consume and eat. But commonly used, a lot of people think of it as being on a specific diet, like a vegan diet, carnivore diet, low carb diet. And then a lot of people just think I'm on a diet, which means I'm just reducing my food intake. So obviously it means different things to different people. But yeah, I mean, I think definitely the other factor is a lot of people will say, well, it's not really the diet, it's the other, what you were saying, it could be other lifestyle factors. So, and for sure, you know, exercise comes into it, stress, sleep. Yeah. All these other lifestyle factors, and of course the toxins are in our environment is a big one as well, and pollution, etc. So for sure, our environment is very different compared to what it was, and that for sure does play a role. But no question, the biggest chunk to explain the decline in our health in the last couple of 100 years is the actual food that we're putting into our mouth and consuming, and the effect that that's having on us physically and mentally. For sure, that's the number one cause for our poor health, no question.
Okay. Well, let's kind of start getting into the diet stuff.
Okay.
And I'll ask it this way. Say I'm, whatever, I'll be Connor and I'll be 27 like I am. I'm 50 pounds overweight, I don't exercise, I eat a standard American diet, which is high in processed foods, you know, whatever, and I want to start losing some weight, I want to get in shape. Where do I start? What are some things that are important? Should I start by just jumping on carnivore or a vegan diet to be healthy? Or are there other factors that I should start looking at, like nutrient density and the difference between processed foods and whole foods?
Yeah.
Where do we start?
So what I really want to do is, because this is really sort of like the overarching piece of research that I want to use for this podcast, because this is incredible, because the big question is, how has our diet changed in the last 200 years? So when we went from almost no rates of obesity, when we didn't have all these serious health issues that we just take as standard and normal today. What is the difference? So we can sort of reverse engineer.
Start looking backwards.
Yeah, so if we can reverse engineer and see what we can take from that, that I think would be an amazing starting point. And then we can kind of get really into the sort of specifics and give people a really good framework that then they can use, that I think will just clarify everything in their mind so they really understand this and they'll never be confused. I know it's a big, lofty goal for this podcast, but I want people never to be confused about diet ever again. So
let's do that. Do you want to start by looking backwards and what we used to eat?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
So it's funny because I've always been trying to find all the data and stats, and it's difficult because when you look at the records kept, a lot of really good records they only started to keep them from the 1950s onwards. So how do you go back 100 and even 200 years ago
that's a good point.
to really find good information and data? Because there's bits and pieces, and I was trying to piece these together and, going down the rabbit hole and searching for all sorts of things. And because I just thought, oh yeah, I'll just Google it. It's going to tell me, it's going to be easy, but it's actually not. But this paper only came out last year. So this was United States dietary trends since 1800. And this was done, Department of Neurology, New York University, New York Medical College of Wisconsin. So there's a number of doctors and researchers that put this paper together because they really wanted to look at this. And they looked at food availability and estimated consumption data from 1800 to 2019 using historical sources from the federal government and additional public data sources. So they did all the work for me. When I came across this,
so good.
Finally, someone's really gone deep into this, and it's brilliant because they went deep into it and showed all the data and stats, and there's lots of graphs. And I really do urge people to genuinely do click on the link down below, do look up this research and have a good read of it, because this is ultimately going to give you a good framework and you'll really understand how we went off this cliff. So I'm just going to give you some of the little short bits out of this that I think are really good. So conclusions, as observed from the food availability data, processed and ultra-processed food dramatically increased over the past 2 centuries. So I don't think that's too startling of a statement. I don't think people go, oh, no, we always ate ultra-processed foods and we had cans of soda and Twinkies or whatever thousands of years ago. Obviously we didn't, right? So that's not too startling. But what do we mean by ultra-processed food? So they kind of really break that down, and this is the interesting part. So if you go, well, what is it? So especially sugar, right? White flour, white rice, vegetable oils, and ready-to-eat meals. So that's what they found when they went through. They're the biggest changes in the diet in the last 200 years. And they because they went through all this in the research, these changes paralleled the rising incidence of NCDs. So NCDs are non-communicable diseases. In other words, again, the biggest thing was communicable diseases. In other words, infectious disease, what was killing us. So non-communicable diseases is basically your metabolic health or metabolic disease. So all the other things like heart disease, cancer, dementia, diabetes, etc. So they've obviously been increasing while these foods have been increasing, the ultra-processed foods. Now it's interesting because they say, well, animal fat and meat, etc., has been inversely correlated in the last 200 years, because a lot of people point to that, and we'll talk about that. But just overall, just the big takeaway, it's ultra-processed food, okay? And the breakdown of that is sugar, flour, rice, vegetable oils, and ready-to-eat meals.
And so we're seeing that rise as obesity and diabetes
as all of these
are
diseases
rising.
rise.
Okay.
Yeah. So, they talk about chronic NCDs include metabolic syndromes. This is what I was just saying. Abdominal obesity, hypertension, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, insulin resistance, hyperinsulinemia, elevated triglycerides, low HDL, type 2 diabetes, gout, heart disease, stroke, cancer, etc. So Alzheimer's. So they're all the things that have dramatically increased while our consumption of ultra-processed food has increased as well. So that's, a really good kind of overview. So they go on to say, the American diet has changed radically in the past 2 centuries, with the most marked changes including increased consumption, same again, of processed and ultra-processed foods. So that's the big, big takeaway. So they kind of break this down and they talk about the different types of proteins, fats, carbohydrates. They go through everything. Now it's interesting, from 1800 to 2000, so 200 years, red meat consumption declined by 44%. So, the way everyone's saying, oh, it's the meat that's going to kill us. Well, you go back 100, 200 years and we were consuming more. So it's hard to attribute all that to just eating meat.
Yeah.
It just doesn't, it just doesn't add up for that to be the culprit. And they also talk about the different types of fats. The average American consumed tenfold more, inverted brackets, heart-healthy PUFAs, which is polyunsaturated fatty acids, and added caloric sweeteners like sugar, basically tripled across the 20th century. So huge rise in the vegetable oils.
And everyone's scared of the saturated fats.
Yeah, because they're showing that
the animal fats basically is what saturated fats are.
Yeah, so it's all the new foods. So if you just think about it in a very simple way, through modern processing and the Industrial Revolution, because we weren't able to consume those foods thousands of years ago. Because you're not going to take these little seeds and squeeze them and take the oil out. Like, how would you do that without all this big machinery? If you see the process, it's not like it goes through 14 stages.
Yeah, it's crazy.
They deodorize it, bleach it. They do all these things to get oils out of the grains. So obviously we weren't consuming those. So they are the big, big changes. And the other thing that they do point out is the energy balance hypothesis of obesity is supported by a 22% increase in available calories from 1970 to 2010. So they do show that our overall consumption, our calories has gone up as well.
Oh, interesting.
So we'll talk about that because a lot of people think that's all there is to it. So there's great, really good charts and stuff like that in here. So definitely, I do urge people to look at that because this is the best paper I've come across, and I've been looking for somewhere that just has all this laid out beautifully, all the consumption of the different foods in the last couple of 100 years, because it really does, like I said, if we just went back in time, even 50 years, but definitely 100, 200 years, obviously, then we'd reverse all the modern diseases. I have to get this right, and maybe we'll put it up on the screen because I may not have the exact number, but something along the lines of each 10% increase of ultra-processed foods, the cancer increase goes up about 13, 14%.
Gosh.
So we'll put an asterisk on the screen to give you the exact number, but it's very close to that anyway. And there's another interesting aspect of it here.
Glad you asked.
Because even when you look at ultra-processed food, this is interesting. Eating processed foods is hurting your brain, the study shows. Even 2 cookies can affect your health. So again, just to show that it's not just your health, but even your brain. So, research presents, and this was the Alzheimer's Association International Conference, outlined how foods such as instant noodles, sugary drinks, plays a faster rate of cognitive decline.
Wow.
So this was very interesting. Just 100 calories of processed food can affect your physical health. So that's 2 cookies. And research has linked ultra-processed food consumption to obviously health problems like obesity, cardiovascular disease. And now we are starting to realize the effects on the mind because they cause inflammation, which can affect neurotransmitters in the brain. So that's a big thing that they're starting to understand. It's actually inflammation in the brain that's causing the cognitive decline.
Interesting.
And even when it comes to depression, they used to think it was all to do with serotonin. That was debunked recently, just a few months ago. Yeah. So inflammation is a much greater marker when you're really interested in your brain because that's almost the worst thing that can happen to you. Like whatever about having, something physically wrong with you, if your brain goes, your whole quality of life, forget about it.
Yeah.
Like, sorry for the forget about it.
No, it's fine. It's true. I think
it's terrible.
It's a very serious topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So that really is, like I said, just think about it. Just even if you take a moment and take a step back and you realize, whoa, this should be, like I said, front page of every magazine and paper. Sorry, I'm showing my age. I know we don't have those anymore on your online whatever news, but it really is. This is the number one thing, and millions of people are dying every year. We've just gone through COVID, which is a big shocking thing, and we took masses of action against, and we didn't even consider, like, what about our metabolic health? Because that, for instance, had a direct correlation with how you're going to survive. Like 95% of people that died had on average 4 comorbidities. And you can see that rates, for instance, in America, because
like
we have
obesity, diabetes, hypertension.
Exactly. And whatever you know, and everyone's going to argue about all the different things that were done and should have been done and all that kind of stuff. But bigger picture, they should have been emphasizing our metabolic health number one, no question. And that would have had an amazing impact. But instead we did the opposite. And now even during those years, like childhood obesity and diabetes and everything skyrocketed, I really feel sorry for those kids because I know how this works. They won't come back from that. They're like, going to end up with a lifelong illnesses because of that.
Yeah.
So
it'll take a lot of work to overcome it.
Ignore metabolic health at the peril of humanity. That's what I'm kind of saying.
Yeah.
And that's why I really want us to all be on the same page that, look, we can argue about all the different diets and we'll go through it with that framework. But, big thing is ultra processed food. It's made up of sugar, all the kind of processed grains and flours, and the industrial seed oils. So they're the 3 components that we really want to look at and reduce dramatically. And the other thing, the other half of that I just want to point out, and sorry, I know I'm just pretty passionate about this stuff.
No, it's fine.
But then that also means our nutrient density has diminished. And that's what they say in the studies and stuff like that, is that it's the lack of nutrients as well, which is huge. So because of these ultra-processed foods are knocking out normal, good, nutritious food, our nutrient levels are way lower.
Yeah.
So we want to reduce the ultra-processed foods and we want to increase our nutrient levels. So just those 2 things, even if you come away from this with nothing else, keeping it really simple, reduce your ultra-processed food, increase your nutrient density, real foods. And that's the big overarching. So when we start to now look at every diet and we can start to get into that, that's the framework. And hopefully that, and definitely play devil's advocate if that's not clear enough.
No, I think that's great. It's like, I don't care if you're vegan or carnivore. It's like if your diet contains those things that we just outlined that are just terrible for your health, it's a pretty good idea that maybe you should start looking at something else,
Yeah. So for the fun of it, I was thinking, you could just throw out all the different diets.
Oh, I would be very happy to do that.
Use this framework and then we'll kind of rate them and, discuss them a little bit.
We could also go through some fad ones too.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
some little hacks. First one I want to talk about is calorie restriction, because I think it's probably the most common. If you want to lose weight, eat less, right? Calories in, calories out. Does it work? Is it that simple? Blow us away.
Okay, so most common thing is, look, and even that research paper does show that the average person is consuming more calories. So you could say, well,
and probably moving less. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that has been a message very much pushed by the industry, because they don't know the ultra processed food industry. Because they don't want us to start to distinguish between healthy and unhealthy calories. They go, oh well, we just all need to move more and eat less, and your soda or fast food or whatever ultra processed food that they're pushing can be totally part of a nice, healthy, balanced diet, right? So that's very common, pushed by the industry, and somewhat makes logical sense. Oh, we're just consuming too much, and when we consume too much, then we're, obviously going to gain weight, and obviously it can also push up your blood sugar and have this poor metabolic impact. So there's no question eating excess calories is bad for you. And if you can continuously do that, because you're pushing more food that you need into the system, and it kind of has it's sort of like overdrive on the system and putting way too much pressure. So the obvious one is weight gain. But even like, obviously, your blood sugar is going to be greater because you're consuming too much. And that the body has to try to do something with it, store it, whatever, it can affect the liver and has all these knock-on effects. So there's no question that has an impact.
But so, again, it's me, Connor, 27, 50 pounds overweight. I eat an American diet, and I want to lose weight. I'm just going to, let's say I eat 2,500 calories. I'm going to eat 2,000 calories. That's going to work, right? I'm going to get fit and look good.
Okay, so few things, okay? So again, let's look at that framework. So we're not reducing, we are reducing the ultra-processed food. So say in that example, you're dropping your calories by roughly 20%. Let's pretend it was 2,400 calories.
Sure.
So we can say,
nice
anyway,
math,
roughly speaking. So let's say you reduce your calories by 20%. Well then, by default, if you don't change the structure of your diet, now you're consuming 20% less everything. So let's say you're consuming 20% less ultra-processed food. So you could say, okay, well, that's a little step in the right direction. Now, you're not eliminating ultra-processed food because it's still 60% of your diet, but you're just consuming a little bit less of it. No question, that will help your health a little bit. But then on the flip side, the nutrient density, what's happening there? You're eating less nutrient-dense foods as well. That's a major, major problem and flaw with that argument, because if you just prioritize and you're saying, I'm just going to reduce the amount of calories and then that's it, you are going to be malnourished.
Yes.
And all the research shows this. On vast majority of any calorie controlled, if that's the priority, what happens is, on the scale, of course, you're going to go, well, I'm hungry, but I'm not going to eat. You're going to work against your hunger. You're going to force yourself not to eat. You will lose weight on the scale.
Yes.
Your blood sugar and everything may get a little bit better because you're consuming a little bit less. So your blood sugar won't rise as much. You won't get as many spikes. So you will get little benefits. But what happens is a lot of the weight loss is actually going to be muscle tissue because you're also consuming less protein and less nutrients for metabolic health. So that's going to counteract. And that's why in all these research studies, they expect when they're just looking at the energy balance and looking at that model, they go, oh, yeah, well, if we do this and you're taking less calories, we expect that you're going to lose 10 kilos or 20 pounds, 22 pounds, whatever it is. But then in actual fact, they only lose like 10% of that in some of these studies. So we're like, why is this not working? Well, number one, your metabolism will slow down because now you have less muscle tissue, you're losing muscle, less nutrient density, so the mitochondria and the cells don't have the nutrients they need, so your metabolism slows down. And we went through that again. If you want to go to the weight loss thing, we went through that much more detail in there and really talked about that. So just by doing that, and all the studies show that a year later, people end up putting back on the weight, and in most cases more. So a lot of studies show that. 2007 UCLA went through, I think, 31 of the most popular diets, and their conclusion was don't go on a diet because you'll end up worse than when you started because it's just calorie reduction. And that has been proven not to work. So again, if you think about it, yes, we're consuming too many calories, but if you don't change the quality of those calories, you will fail. So that's 100%.
That's it?
Yeah.
Now, there is something to be said. Say I'm 27 and fit and very active, and I eat a very good, well-balanced, whole foods-based diet, and I do want to trim down a little bit. I want to slowly start losing a little bit of body fat. Is it smart for me, if I already have a healthy diet, should I reduce calories by 10 or 20% to lose that little bit of extra body fat? What do you think about that?
So you absolutely can. Now, again, if we're just going back into the weight stuff, my favorite way, and this is the way I work with like 80-90% of the clients here, is that I focus on, because we have a set point in the hypothalamus, and again, refer to that other podcast where we went into this in detail. So I prefer, it's like the horse and cart situation. To me, the calories is the cart, not the horse, right? So it's like, that's the effect, not the cause. Like, why are we overeating? And again, masses of research, ultra-processed food makes you hungrier because it's not as filling. It tricks your brain into eating more. A lot of these ultra-processed foods are actually designed to cause you to overeat. So, but yeah, I mean, you absolutely can in the short run say, okay, well, I'm going to just, if you have everything dialed in and you're watching all these things, yeah, it'll work fine. And if it's a healthy diet and the right balance of stuff and you reduce calories and you want to get a little leaner, it will work. But if you take into account, again, with the other podcast, the hunger aspect and your set point in the brain, and understanding that's going to be important.
Yeah. So it will work and it can be effective, but you do have to count your calories and really track it. Something we've talked about before, probably on the weight loss, is it might be just more effective to change the
ratio, the types of food you're doing, and keep your calories the same. You know, maybe add 25% more protein
and take down the
processed foods, or the carbohydrates or sugars down 25%. Just replace the ratio,
and that'll probably have a good effect too.
Yeah, because again, we went into this, not all calories are equal. And again, from a health perspective, you don't want to be malnourished. That's not good for your metabolic health, because we're just talking about weight there, but with everything else as well, so important, because again, what is it that causes blood sugar spikes? The type of food is huge. So, and we'll do a whole other one on blood sugar, because that deserves its own podcast. But so if you take 100 or like 400 calories of high glycemic carbohydrates or sugar, it's obviously going to spike your blood sugar more than protein or fats, So it's going to have a massive difference on your metabolic health, no question. So it's not just about calories, it's about the quality of calories. So that's what, again, another key takeaway. It's about the quality of calories, not just the quantity. Now, quantity comes into it. If you eat 10,000 calories, even if it's healthy food, way more, you're going to suffer. But it's very hard to do that. Very hard to do that, like really hard. So again, quality over quantity is the big takeaway.
Awesome.
So I'm just going to use that framework and go through each of the diets so that we can kind of keep a sort of consistency, because for sure with keto in particular, there are other factors, and we're going to do another whole podcast on this. God, we've got a lot of podcasts to do. But anyway, we are going to do one on that and really delve into the science. But I'm going to maybe, or you tell me not if you don't, but I'm going to lump in low carb and keto together.
Perfect.
Now, keto does have this unique factor because it switches your energy system from using glycogen or sugar as energy to using fat and obviously ketones. But just in general, let's call low carb keto that category. And then let's just put that framework of what's happened in the last 200 years and see, is that the answer basically? Is that the diet to choose? Because we are going to come up with one winner at the end.
Whoa.
But unfortunately, keto lovers, this is not the winner. But let's just go through it.
I have an idea what is.
Okay.
I'm going to jot it down, save it for later.
Yeah, so first of all, ultra-processed foods, the three categories, the sugar. Okay, so on a keto low carb, there's definitely a lot less sugar. So almost none.
Check.
So check mark for that one, okay?
Step in the right direction.
Then processed grains like flours and high glycemic carbohydrate processed, we'll give it another check, because that's going to be way, way lower on the keto or low carb.
Our blood glucose a lot less.
Yeah. Now, number 3, it doesn't necessarily, and this is going to be a big thing throughout, you'll see, necessarily, because you can do any of these diets, I think, in the right or wrong way. So, but number 3, I'm not going to give it a tick, because that's the industrial seed oils. So technically, you can still be keto because it's fat, right? They are still fats. Now, they're unhealthy fats, but you could consume those and still be keto. So you can still wear your keto badge or your low carb, whatever, and be taking ultra processed oils. So industrial seed oils, corn oil, soy oil, safflower, sunflower, all of those oils. So that's where it's going to get an X for me. Now, again, a lot of people that do keto probably do know that and are probably doing the right type. So if that's you, well, then you can put a tick, okay? But just purely saying, well, you got to reduce your carbs and take more fat and protein, it won't get a tick there. And then if we flip over to the other side, which is the nutrient density, and see, well, is it going to increase your nutrient density? Well, by eliminating the flours and the sugars, it does leave more room. So the probability of increasing nutrient density is greater because you're focusing on more nutrient-dense foods. But again, not necessarily. So you could do low carb and keto and it not be that nutrient dense, but it would be quite hard. So the
Just eat
probability,
processed cheese and gross chicken or something.
yeah, well, I mean, you could be eating a lot of these keto snacks, these artificial ones, you know, on the market. And you
Fat
could,
pods or whatever.
yeah, but just even if you break down actual vitamins, nutrients, micronutrients, all of those things, again, you may or may not get a big surge of them. I think the probability is they will increase somewhat.
Yeah.
And again, people that are health conscious, a lot of people probably listening and watching this are, and probably do increase. So again, most people will probably do it right, low carb keto, because it does get 2 big tick marks. It gets an X on the fats because you don't necessarily know if it's going to be healthy, because they can go overboard. Some people may consume way too much saturated fat. And again, we'll talk about that on another podcast and really break that down. But they may not get the right type of fats, and they may or may not. Again, I'll give a question mark or sort of like a medium. So I'll give 2.5 out of 4, I guess, if we're going to start doing the scoring, just based on this is, because to me it's all about priorities. So we've got a framework, and I want all of those to be number 1 priority of whatever you're doing. So for keto, low carb, you could get 4 marks if you fill in the gaps, but you can strictly be low carb or keto and only get 2.5 out of 4. The way I see low carb and keto now, and I used to be all in on this like 20, 30 years ago, thinking this was the answer to everything, because you end up with this bias and then you're looking through everything. And I fell for that. I just thought that's the answer for everything. Definitely about 20 years ago, if you asked me, oh, everyone should be low carb keto. But then when you're working with, and this is the big thing, like I'm working with thousands of people over decades. And so for some people, it just doesn't work. And you can theoretically think, oh, well, their insulin's lower and this and that and everything should work, but it just doesn't. And there are like other factors. I mean, when you take into account like everybody's system, everybody's different. So it's not going to work for everybody. But I do find for most people, especially short term, if they do it for 3 months or something, they'll see great results. Because generally the average person is, if they're coming off the standard American diet, the SAD, S-A-D, the SAD diet, and they do that, and if they go on any diet, quite frankly, they'll probably feel and look and get great results. But for sure, it kind of gives their system a rest of the overload of the blood sugar insulin, and they probably have a certain amount of insulin resistance, so they're just not going to work well off carbs. So it kind of gives that whole system a little bit of a break. The pancreas and stuff, it gets a little bit of a rest. So they can kind of suddenly feel great and get really good results. It's a very satiating diet. So without consciously, and again the research shows this, without consciously trying to reduce their food intake, they automatically will. So that's the reason I use that quite a lot as a tool in the toolkit. Again, do I think it's the ultimate whatever? You'll see in the end which one it is. But
it's a tool in the toolbox.
Yeah, and I definitely rate it high, and I do use it a lot in conjunction with what we're talking about. Now, possible downsides is things to do with the microbiome, because there can be a lot less fruits and vegetables. And the fibers that you need for a really healthy microbiome can be lacking long term. Technically, what does vegan mean? So vegan, and again, a lot of people will say it means different things, because there's sort of environmental vegans, there's ethical vegans, and then there's sort of health vegans, and they're classified in different ways. Now, for the purposes of this, we're just talking about health. So when it comes to that, again, just looking at that framework, so top level, does it necessarily mean that we're reducing ultra-processed foods? So sugar, well, sugar is vegan, so you can eat as much sugar as you like, and you're still technically vegan. Okay, so it's going to get an X there, because it doesn't help you there. Is it going to reduce flours and processed grains? Again, not necessarily. Again, you could be a vegan, plant-based, vegetarian, listen to this and understand this and be doing that right. So I just want to clarify that. So you could be doing all these things right and then be vegan, that's a whole different thing. But just for the average person thinking the number one most important thing is to eliminate meat and animal products, that I would disagree with purely from the point of view of using, again, I'm just scientifically using this framework Does it reduce ultra-processed food? Not necessarily, because it's not going to reduce the sugar, processed grains, and industrial seed oils. They're all technically vegan. The flip side, nutrient density, you're going to get a big X there, because a lot of the nutrient density is in animal products. So that's a fact. Like, again, there are other ways to get in nutrient density? Absolutely.
The quality of your protein even is one example.
Yeah. So unfortunately, all across the board, they're getting a lot of excess. Now, again, I want to clarify, you can do all those things and then be vegan. Or, funnily enough, I've worked with people, I've worked with so many people that are vegan. And quite frankly, they see great results because I apply this framework onto the vegan diet. So I make sure that they're reducing their ultra-processed foods and getting in more nutrient density, and they will see great results as a consequence. Because a lot of them, they start off and they may not know much about anything to do with health, but they just think, oh, I've eliminated this. So for the average person, and there is a paper here that says, okay, well, what happens when you reduce meat in your diet? So this was an interesting study that was done. This was the consumption of ultra-processed foods by pesco-vegetarians, vegetarians, and vegans. So what they found was higher avoidance of animal-based foods was associated with the higher consumption of ultra-processed foods. So, they saw that all across the board, that when they reduced meat, the ultra-processed food consumption increased for the average person that tried to avoid meat. So that obviously is a big X.
Yeah.
So again, there's a big thing between potentially what can happen and then what actually does happen, and the probability for the average person. And this is something that you start to realize when you're working day to day with people. So that's a huge thing that I find is different from, just people that just look up studies and research and come up with sort of theories as opposed to working with real people in real life. Very, very different. So that, unfortunately, again, that's a fact. 84% can't even maintain it after a year because it's so limiting. Now, does that mean you can't be a vegan and healthy? I'm not saying that.
Yeah, and there's some vegan bodybuilders that look great.
Absolutely. So if you, here's the way I would say it is, use this framework, prioritize reducing your ultra-processed foods, increasing nutrient density. And then after that, if you want, I just prefer this because vegan is a very negative anti thing. It's like, oh, animal things are bad, okay? Where I have always and I've literally worked with, we had a trainer, awesome trainer, and she was vegan. And I just said, well, focus on being plant-based rather than vegan, because then it's a positive thing. And then you're focusing on really good nutrient-dense plants, fruits and vegetables. And that's your goal, to kind of really get the best out of that. And then maybe not have, because these hard lines are arbitrary. And in some cases, you can consume, vegan foods, but how that's processed, and these big kind of huge manufacturers, they just destroy the environments, they spray all the poisons, they kill the bees. Their carbon harvester, I grew up living beside farms my whole life in Ireland.
They'll tear stuff up.
Oh my God, you walk through the fields and you'll see rabbits and all the kind of wildlife chopped up, you're killing animals. So if it's done in the wrong way and you're getting your processed, ultra-processed vegan food, that may not be the answer for anything that you're trying to do anyway. I really don't want to upset people, and it's not, I'm not anti anything. I just think, I think there's a lot of positives in plant food, so I'm not anti-plant-based. And like I said, I think you can make up for nutrient deficiencies by adding in a lot of things. Now, again, when I work with vegans, I do recommend quite a lot of supplementation to make up for the lack of nutrients, like free-form amino acids to get their protein levels up, B12 supplementation, zinc, iron, all these different things in vegan forms, so that they can then fill in those gaps. So there are, like I said, much healthier ways to do it. So if that's your feeling, my kind of thing is great. But prioritize this, the nutrient density, reduce your ultra-processed foods, and maybe just from a point of view of, I just love plant-based. I just think it's a much more positive thing than saying, because otherwise we're always going to have this fight and people are saying, well, this is healthy, this is not, and we're going to be butting heads. But I think for the sake of, quite frankly, humanity, can we not get on the same page and go with this framework? And then absolutely, some people can go keto, some people can go, plant-based and even carnivore. So, but let's agree this framework first.
Yeah.
And because we're fighting at the bottom. That's my biggest kind of thing, is that it's priorities. Let's really focus on the bigger picture, and let's not like squabble about number 99 and 100 on the list. And again, I found in real life working with people that just some people will operate really well, even like, for instance, meat just doesn't suit them. Like, I've genuinely come across people, and no matter what I think or what my biases are, I can see it. Yeah, they're just, when they eat it, they feel terrible. It just, for whatever reason, it could be their microbiome, it could be all sorts of things. It's just not working for them. So carnivore, so let's go through the checklist. Let's do a proper scorecard. And I haven't even done this, so I'm doing it kind of live. I mean, I've got my framework, I've got an idea, but I've never actually added up numbers or done it like this. But let's say, okay, ultra-processed food, sugar, okay, well, tick, because you're not taking sugar when you're doing carnivore. And then the second one is going to be the flours and processed grains. So they're going to get a check mark there. So industrial seed oils, they're going to get a check mark. Well,
Depends on what you cook your meat in, I guess.
Yeah, I think pretty much. I mean, it's obviously meat-based. Now, there's different levels of carnivore. So there's pure, like, just nothing but meat.
And there's
and
the
then
olive oil people.
So technically, is olive oil then, is that carnivore? So it's hard to define 100%. But let's be generous and we'll give them a tick mark for the industrial seed oils, because I think it's definitely not animal-based. They're going to be into lard and tallow and the animal fats. So I'll give them a tick mark. And then for nutrient density, it's looking pretty good. Yeah. So it looks like it's scoring really high. But so for the nutrient density, actually, I'm going to give a half mark.
Okay.
So actually, funny enough, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm almost thinking of an X. So okay, let me explain this. So no question, animal products are very nutrient dense, but they're lacking in certain nutrients as well. So there are a lot of components of plant-based, fruits and vegetables, and especially when you start to look at the microbiome, that it seems to help us a lot. Now again, you're going to find some people will do very well and even can't handle the plant-based, like especially if it's got severe autoimmune conditions or gut issues. Yep. Some people will thrive off a carnivore diet, and I know of a lot of people. Yeah. But so people like that. So, but again, for the average person, do they really need to, like, so if you take it to the extreme, are they saying that plant-based foods are poisonous and are bad for you? I mean, I would kind of criticize that as much as I would with the vegans, so I'd almost, they're both anti-something. So carnivore means that, well, plant-based is really bad for you. So that's where I would definitely, maybe kind of go a little bit against it. So again, some people will do really well on it. And again, the big thing is to watch what's happening, watch your blood markers, all these things, to see whether or not it's working for you. But on the whole, I would probably give a less of a mark for that. And I do think people could run into issues. Now, you could debate about this left, right, and center, but that's where I would go. Look, some people may thrive off it. I think for the average person, it's pretty extreme. And I do think they could be lacking in a lot of nutrients and some health, especially short term. I think people could do very well on it. Quality of food is going to be a big factor. If you can get grass-fed, pasture-raised, is going to be important if that's all you're going to eat. So you don't want to start consuming really. So that's another big caveat.
When you start adding in organ meats, do you think differently about the nutrient density?
Well, nutrient density, like no question, will be really high when you do it. But like I said, not all nutrients. I do think you can be lacking in some nutrients, and especially when you start to look at the microbiome and things like that. So arguably you could say, well, some diets are closer to carnivore or even keto, like in traditional diets. So when they look at like the Eskimos or whatever, because they don't have any vegetation that grows because they're up in the Antarctic or whatever. So that, could be a case. But then there's other natural diets that are 90% plant-based and,
Eat sweet potatoes.
Sweet potatoes, and can thrive. So, so it's one of those things, but like I think it's very restrictive for the average person. Now, just for a matter of interest, I think Paul Saladino is putting out great information, and there's it's funny because he eats fruit and I
honey.
think eggs.
He loves honey.
And honey. So I don't know whether he's known as the kind of carnivore guy, but I don't.
Taking a step back a little bit.
So so then it's something maybe a little bit different, but anyway, I think that's probably enough for the carnivore. I mean, again, I'm not anti any of these things, but looking through that lens, I would definitely have a couple of little question marks, but in some areas, I think it scores highly.
Bruce Lee diet. I feel like a lot of people might not know about this.
Yeah.
Not as popular.
So, if I was to say the best diet in the world using this framework.
Oh no, did I jump the gun? Oh, dang, it's okay, go ahead.
The best diet in the world using this framework would be the Bruce Lee diet.
Wow.
So what
that was
the heck?
Not my guess. That was not my guess.
Okay, so what is the Bruce Lee diet? Well, so the way I describe this, and this is a bit of a, tongue-in-cheek thing, but the way I always look at it is, anyone who is into martial arts, there's so many different types of martial arts out there. There's karate, there's kempo, jiu-jitsu, taekwondo, all these different, like dozens and dozens of different types of martial arts. Now, what Bruce Lee did was very interesting because most of the time you get stuck in one. And then you've got all your doctrines, and this is the way you must fight, and this is the way you must act, and this is the way you must do everything. So it's very kind of like within a very definite framework, and you've got your rules and regulations. Now, what Bruce Lee did that was different from every other martial artist at the time, he actually went around and learned them all. And he found out what works best for him, and then he ended up better than everybody, right? So he was like, okay, I can use this here, and I can use the throws from judo, and I can use the punches from karate, and all this kind of stuff. But then he developed his own style from that, and he ended up better than everybody. In fact, when he came over to the States, it was interesting because they didn't like that he was, because these were very sacred things and traditional and stuff, and he didn't like that he was sharing this with the West. So they said, no, you can't do that. And he said, I'll tell you what. You send me over the best fighter, whatever, and if you win, I'll come back, tail between my legs, and I'll stop doing it. If I win, you leave me alone and you let me keep going. So they figured out the best fighter. They sent him over, and Bruce Lee was very disappointed because he expected to win much faster, but it took him 3 minutes to win the fight. So he was very disappointed. So that's kind of what happened. It just shows you the level. So he was the first, like, real mixed martial artist, the first true MMA, in history or whatever. So, but I use that as a framework. So in other words, so absolutely what I'm talking about here, we're going to reduce our ultra-processed food. We're going to increase the nutrient density. But then remember, it's all about the individual. And this is something that is actually starting to come up in the research more and more. So some people will thrive way more off plant-based materials and foods. Some people will thrive more off animal-based. Some people will thrive off all sorts of things. And everyone is so different. So your microbiome, your genetics. So for instance, dairy, that's an interesting one. So we started introducing dairy somewhere between 10 to 50,000 years ago. So there was normally, obviously, dairy as a kid. Obviously, you can take dairy because that's how you survive, mother's milk. So you have what's called lactase, which helps to break down lactose. But then for the age of, I think, around 6, that stops, and then you have trouble breaking that down. But when they started introducing dairy into the diet over generations, they had what's called lactase resilience, which means even as an adult, you still were able to break that down. So for instance, the Northern Europeans, about 85% of them had that genetic mutation so they could consume dairy and get all the nutrients from it and not have any of the downsides. Whereas in Asia, they didn't adopt dairy as much. So only 15% of them, for instance, have that genetic mutation. So that's just one of many like little illustrations. Like in Japan, they've got microbes in their gut that can absorb nutrients from seaweed and stuff like that much more effectively than we can. So there's all these things. So it does become something that's individual. So no matter what you read, no matter what forums or groups that you're in, no matter what your biases are, listen to your body, watch what's actually happening and try to be as objective as you can. Because, I mean, some people have hemochromatosis. You put them on a carnivore diet, not a great idea because they have too much iron in their system. And the last thing they want to be taking is lots of liver. It's going to shoot their iron up even further. They actually have to give blood to keep their iron levels down. So really when it comes down to it, and that's what they're finding is that everybody is reacting to different foods in different ways. So number one, the framework that we're talking about. And then number two, the best diet is the one that's best for you. So that's the real ultimate winner, the Bruce Lee diet. So anytime now when you're...
Take everything, take the best.
And make something for you.
When you're arguing at the dinner table, you say, excuse me, I know the answer, vegan, carnivore, vegetarian, Mediterranean. I know what the best diet is, and you can tell them about the Bruce Lee diet, and then you'll get all the marks. so that's my big kind of the winner at the end, which not many people probably saw coming unless they heard this before. So awesome. But yeah, like I really go back to that framework. Have a look at that study. It's awesome. Simple, reduce ultra-processed food. Know what they are. Increase nutrient density, and then if you feel what works for you, then absolutely, just don't get stuck in one way of thinking, because it's very easy, especially nowadays with social media, you just join the groups and it comes confirmation bias. It's like, oh, look here, we found another success story, we found another research paper that backs up our thing. Okay, it's only associational, but anyway, go on about that stuff. But so that is the big thing. I don't think, again, I don't know, maybe people will take offense to some of this. I don't know, but I just really feel like it's hard to argue ultra-processed foods down, nutrient density up, individualize. That's my big overpoint, because I do think if we can get on the same page and not be arguing and fighting, it means collectively, my big wish or dream is that we wake up to metabolic health. And this is going to be a huge component of it, and, push for change so that everybody can get nutrient-dense, real foods. And the economy and whatever needs to happen and the industries to change for that. Because if it doesn't, we are doomed. We are already doomed. Like, I mean, we've never been so unhealthy, so unhappy, mentally and physically. Suffering from all these diseases, the impact on our economy and our quality of life. I mean, we think we've advanced, but no, humans haven't. We've created great technology, but we have actually declined while we've created these amazing things. And until we end all the bickering and like get on the same page and have the same kind of message, then we're never going to be able to do. So even if it's just a person watching this that just wants stuff for them, hopefully that's a framework that, quite frankly, if you're don't already know this and are not already doing this, can absolutely transform your life, like really can. And even bigger, if you can share this information. This is something that I do think is worth sharing and liking, and so we can get this out to as many people as possible and say, hey, we were talking about diet. Well, what do you think of this? Or do you think these guys are crazy or whatever?
I think that's great.
But I love this framework to kind of get out there and that message. And there are some people that do say this, but I wish more people were saying it. And it should be, like I said, front, top-end news everywhere. I want to get this message clearer and clearer. And I'm always open to learning and understanding. I never stop learning and understanding. There's always things that I'm questioning all the time. I've even got a few things in my mind go, am I wrong about that? This is hopefully I am wrong about this, but I'm starting to wonder, like, is caffeine really good for you? And I'm hoping
don't
I'm
say
wrong
it.
about
No,
it, because
stop-
I like my
Stop
coffee.
reading into it.
But I got to keep an open mind. That's
Yeah.
my big thing, is because that's, so I actually don't have it here, but I have the Bruce Lee medallion.
Oh yeah.
So going back to the Bruce Lee diet, but I actually have the, obviously the
wow.
copy of his medallion, because
I'd love to
he
see
has
you wear
the,
that.
I'll bring it next time, but it is cool because it literally says, having no way as way, having no limitation as limitation. That's his motto, which really means just have an open mind.
Yeah.
No way as way, no limitation as limitation. Keep an open mind. Try not to get boxed into any of these ways. And honestly, I think we can come together, because I think there's never been a time in history where we've been more, well, I'm sure there has, but we seem very polarized nowadays.
Yeah.
And I really feel most of us have the same underlying wants, needs, desires, and ideas. We all want to succeed and get on, and everyone to do well. And health is just such a crucial part. And I just don't understand why this isn't number one topic, even when it comes to politics. If we don't address this, we're all doomed. I'm sorry, but you can argue about all these other things in politics. If we're not going to improve our health, we're all going to be bankrupt. The country's going to be bankrupt, and we're going to be have less quality of, it's not about quality of life, not about looking and feeling good and positive and having a good, solid future to look forward to.
Yeah.
I mean, health has to be number one, please.
Stop
we don't want
fighting about your diets.
yeah, exactly. Let's get on the same
Let's
page
get
and make a
healthy.
big difference. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So,
Well, with that, we will leave you for the week.
okay.
Thanks a lot for watching, guys.
Yeah.
If you made it this far, we really appreciate it. And please do like and subscribe and send this to a friend. And we'd love to get the word out there. But we will see you guys next time on the Resistance Podcast.
See you on the next one.